Good afternoon, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so it can be with you forever. Today I'm going to be talking about a certain subject that has become very popular in recent years, and that's the concept of tarot reading. Tarot reading has been sort of popularized mostly by a lot of women in general. It's sort of seen as a very feminine activity that seems to go around, but although a lot of men do it as well, it just seems to be more geared towards that group of people. For what reasons, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's just because guys are generally more, right brain or left brain. Is it left brain or right brain? It's left brain. Left brain's the rational, logical side of the brain. It's tarot reading is very much very mystical, very up in the air, very interpretive, very spiritual, which in the general consensus of the world, the very scientific and rigid and very, if I can't see it or if there's no science to back it up, then it's not real, right? So that's kind of like the whole argument against tarot reading. And I'm going to talk about tarot reading in the sense as to why I believe it works on a scientific level, and also on another sense of looking into the situation in terms of a biblical perspective, right? There's a lot of backlash against tarot reading, not just from the scientific and left brain community, but from the religious sects as well. People who are very, Orthodox Christian or just any monotheistic religion in general has a tendency to think of tarot as demonic or evil, or you should stay away from there. And there's also a lot of tarot readers who are against religion as well. They like to proclaim themselves as witches and are interested in Satanism and demonology, which I don't really ascribe to those kinds of values and belief systems. I'm still, a Jew. I believe in the Old Testament. I still follow it. And there are many reasons why you need to interpret what the laws from the Old Testament are actually trying to say, instead of just taking it at face value that divination is evil. And on the other side of it, that tarot reading and divination in general can be performed through different mediums. And that's important to recognize as well, because that's going to come into play when you're talking about whether it's coming from a medium that's, demonic or toxic or a false flag, so to speak, or if it's coming from a true place of legitimacy and authenticity. So I'm going to start off with why tarot reading can be proven scientifically. And that's if we want to get into the mindset and the belief system that we are living in a simulation. Not in a literal simulation, but we can sort of see that this physical world and this physical reality that we exist in sort of has a tendency to feel like it's a fake world, and that there's another dimension that's sort of controlling things within this world, which at the source of it all is God, the source of the universe, the source of all life, the source of all creation, whatever you want to call it. That is God. That's the source, right? So when you're within this physical world, there are laws that you have to abide by. One of the main laws is the law of chance, or the law of probability, right? There is a tendency of probability in everything. There is no such thing as chaos in this world. Everything is determined by chance and ratios and probabilities, percentages. So when we take that into account, randomness and chaos is a completely made up phenomenon, because we can see in the world that there are synchronicities, there are patterns, there is order in the way the world works. The fact that there is, I'll say 50-50 chance of having a boy or a girl, but it's actually 49-51, which isn't really relevant. But the fact that there is a fixed ratio for every person that's born in order for there to be a specific gender shows you that there is an order. There is an order of chance, right? There's a probability that things need to play out. And if you watch The Matrix, they point this out with Neo being the chosen one, that it was actually like an eventual probability chance, that even though it was a very low chance of occurring over a long enough period of time, it had to happen. And that's sort of the law of the universe. If we take time as a physical construct, as a timeline that we can sort of see right in front of our eyes, we can actually see that every probability exists at one point or another. There's only certain things that cannot exist because of probability. So if there's a 0% chance of something existing, it won't exist on the timeline. However, if there is a 0.1% chance of something is happening, it will appear on the physical timeline. So keeping that in mind, let's relate this back to tarot. When we're living day to day in our life, there is a certain plan based off of probabilities of how our life is going to unfold. There is a preset determined order in our life because of probability, because things need to be placed at certain intervals of time in order for the world to actually make sense and for there to be a structure in the world, which does exist. When we look at tarot reading, these are sort of instances in time that are completely irrelevant towards what's going on in the real world, in a sense, until you actually do the reading, and then it reflects the reality that is already going to happen regardless of if you do the reading or not. Which is the whole point of tarot, is when you do it, is to get a sense of what is going to happen. It's going to be a predictor, right? So if you're going to just assume that when you shuffle a deck of cards, of tarot cards, that it's going to be completely random, that's actually illogical, right? When we look at computer algorithms and we look at coding, for instance, we recognize that pure randomness, pure random shuffle doesn't actually exist. There needs to be an input. You need to input a command in order for there to be a replication or, a mimicking effect of what randomness is. This can be applied to tarot, that randomness when you shuffle a deck of cards cannot actually happen. There has to be an input of some kind in order for there to be an order that originates once you shuffle the deck. And that order is going to be whatever destiny that you want to unfold before you and how you want to see it play out, right? So that's kind of the trick of how tarot works, is that it can't actually be random. Like by law, it cannot be just a random assortment of cards that we attribute meaning to because we want to make stuff up. Logically, scientifically, that makes absolutely no sense. There has to be an order. There has to be a probability chance of it being related to some certain concept, to some certain idea, to some future event in order for there to be the order that you need, right? So that's how it works. It's not as mystical when you think of it like that, but it's important to recognize this so we can actually progress as a society. Now, having said that, let's go into the other aspects, and we're going to talk about the input, right? The input of what you're putting into these cards. Now, as a person who is spiritual, your input and what you're trying to relay should always come directly from source, should always come directly from God, right? If you are not coming from God, if you're not coming from the highest source of creation, then the tarot reading is going to be distorted. It's going to be distorted by other mediums and other effects, right? This is why in the Bible, when you look at Deuteronomy, I forget the exact quote, but there is a section in Deuteronomy that says, when you go to the chosen land, you should not consult diviners or magicians or sorcerers. Why? Not because of the fact that they are practicing divination, because divination was already happening by people like Moses and other prophets after him. They were predicting the future, but they were doing it from a place of being one with God, right? So that's the idea of what you're having to channel. This is just a tool, right? It's like saying you shouldn't go to war, or you shouldn't deal with a warrior of some kind who's going to kill you. That makes sense. It doesn't mean that you should avoid swords or avoid any forms of metal. It doesn't make sense when you think of it like that. So the reasoning as to why that is in the Bible is because those diviners and those magicians were not utilizing their skills based off of God. They were utilizing it based off of deities, spirits, ghosts, spirits of the dead. They would talk to the people of the dead and they would try to get advice from those people. What people need to realize is that those entities, those spirits, are not God. They are not the highest source. So when you're expecting the truth from those beings, you're not actually in a line of certainty that they're going to be telling you the truth. That you have to be careful, because they could have ulterior motives, these spirits, these entities. And that's why when you're looking for a real tarot sorry, when you're looking for a legitimate tarot reader or a person who practices divination, if they're coming from a place of Satanism and demonology and trying to channel mediums of ghosts and past lives and spirits and other weird shit, generally they're probably not as reliable as someone who's going direct to the source, right? That's the whole point, is that you should always be going direct to the source of God. Don't focus on the lower realms of spirituality, which is when you're going to have a more authentic tarot reading experience. And if there is something that you're not supposed to know about in terms of understanding the future, the reading will come across that way because you are in line and you are in touch with God. That is the whole point. So you have nothing to worry about in that sense. When you start being reliant off of a third-party source, some weird spirit in the astral realm or something, you know, they could be leading you off track into some weird fucked up place, which is why you find a lot of these Satanists and demonists and whoever are kind of weird, and they're kind of fucked up. That's why in Deuteronomy they're talking about, like, don't do child sacrifices, don't burn your kids at a stake. You know, that's an important thing to recognize. Like, don't do that. That's a big sign. If you want to know if this person's a legit spiritual person, if they're burning children alive, probably they're not legitimate. So that's the other thing. And then there's, on top of that, just a lot of tarot readers who just aren't even psychic or tuned into the universe in any way whatsoever, and they are actually just lying to you, whether it's through YouTube, and they're actually just, picking out the cards that they want you to hear because, they want to pick the good cards so you hear the good things. A lot of the cards aren't necessarily good or bad. They're just ways of having to deal with situations. That's really what the whole point of divination and tarot reading. It's not necessarily to predict the future, but it's to anticipate what's going to go through your head, what's going to go through your mind, what you're going to be feeling, and how to deal with those emotions, right? So, I do tarot readings. I've had a couple of clients already. So if you want something, I leave my email in the description and we can discuss. I usually charge $10 for a reading. But if you want to go longer and do something more in depth, we can also do that as well. So, trying to think, what else am I missing here with this topic? But yeah, generally don't get into tarot reading as this method to go against God or go against the universe or go against, the patriarchy or whatever the fuck you want to get into, which is, I think, the main reason why this is such a feminine art, is because it goes against the strict hierarchy system of religion and the very strong patriarchal system of the religious sects, which makes a lot of sense, but it's not wise to just go completely against it in the opposite direction, because then you're just creating that mirror effect, and then you have both sides that are completely wrong. I'll also emphasize the fact that you need to understand that the Bible, you can't take it at face value. You should learn about it holistically as a whole, but also recognize that the Bible has been translated multiple times. So you're not reading it unless you read like ancient Hebrew. You're not reading it in the proper language, and you're reading an interpretation of what someone else read. And on top of that, you don't even know if the Bible was meddled with at some point in history in order to maintain power. Don't forget, historically, religion was used to keep people at bay and to hold power to whoever was at the top, which was the Pope or the Emperor or the King, and they used religion as a means to maintain that power. So the reason why they go after people who practice divination, people who practice, tarot reading, or any sort of sorcery or whatever you want to call it, the reason why they went after that is because they were a threat to the authority of religion, right? They didn't want competition. They didn't want other people, in line with God to do readings. Don't forget, tarot reading was very much a Catholic kind of thing. The Cathars tarot deck was like a big thing historically. The Cathars were one of the first people to actually do tarot in the West until they were decimated by the Catholic Church. These were all things that were done in line with God. But if you're not doing it in line with the universal truth, you're going to create a distorted reading for someone, and that's going to lead them astray. And basically, when you're in this kind of line of work, you want to be as objective and as, separated from the objective world as much as possible in order to actually help people the best that you can. Otherwise, you are causing a huge detriment to their progress. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit me up if you want a tarot reading or production lessons or spiritual advice or anything at all. Peace.